Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Mom's Favorites Books My Mother Loved, which is my memorial to the mother you see pictured here. So the first two books that I did for this were both so-called cozy mysteries. And my mother, she loved cozy mysteries towards the end of her life. It was sort of the thing that she always wanted. But the thing was, my mother wasn't always struggling mentally the way she was towards the end. There was a time when she was capable of talking herself into an A on a course without ever having done any actual writing. She just produced summaries and outlines, and the professor said, "Okay, here, let me give you an A on the whole thing." Um, And so my mother loved other books that were deeper and more complex. And this next book is a little bit complex in terms of the opinion that I have heard about it, because my mother loved it and thought it was great, and a lot of people apparently think it's great. My father, the one with the PhD in English literature, who is the source of my other primary list, um, he didn't think so much of this book. And I have to say, here we go with the cover of the book in question, or at least the cover of the particular version that I got, which is from the Internet Library, which basically officially just scans the books. This is pretty much a 1946 publication. Um, Here we go. The inside cover, The 42nd Parallel by John Dos Passos. And the thing about this book is, I can see why people think it's a classic. I can see why people think it's a great book. You can't actually see here because this picture is too small, but this actually has that old phrase, e pluribus unum, from many one. This particular version of the 42nd Parallel was illustrated by one Reginald Marsh. They're basically scribbly line drawings. I didn't realize they would be so small here. If I had known they were going to be this small, I probably would have done that, which isn't that great, but there we go. You can see these are sort of just scribbly drawings. They're pen and ink, they're line, they're not, tremendous. But the interesting thing about this book is that, among other things, um, pardon me as I blow this up for a slightly better look at it. The thing about this book is that it's a lot of sketches. It's a lot of small things. It's a lot of bits and pieces. It functions on an epic scale in certain ways. And this is the first book in a trilogy, which I will be working my way through, however long that may take, and it will feel longer than it actually is, because frankly, I didn't enjoy this book very much. But the thing is that when you look at this book, it's a series of sketches of small bits of tiny pieces of the lives of several different people, of a bunch of different people. And interspersed throughout the book is what reads like a jumbled collection of headlines and bits and pieces of newsprint, because what he's writing about in this book is the civil unrest and the worker unrest that took place uh, leading up into the teens. This is leading into World War One. Part of this takes place sort of during World War One. Um, that as you come up on the end of the book, America has decided to join the war late because they joined the war late. It's one of the reasons why they were such a glory in the war, is because they came sweeping in at the end when everyone was tired and sort of were able to run down the enemy because everyone else was just completely exhausted. Um, I mean, yes, okay, things were more complicated than that, but that was a factor. In any event, that you have here a lot of talk from the perspective of I didn't realize I had so few pictures. Here you go. Let's blow that one up. Um, that you have the perspective of the working class people who want to try to, form unions and do the socialist thing and upset the government. Um, and then you have the perspectives of people in business who don't want that, who don't want the social upset, who want their workers to keep on working, because how else are you supposed to make money if your workers won't work for you? Um, and you have the perspective of a lot of, you know, poor people who started out low on the totem pole, who just want to do better and be better, and And the big problem I find with this book, aside from the fact that it is a constant grind about socialists and the way the system wears people down, and the way practicality always interferes with idealism, and how idealists are sometimes not quite as ideal as you would think they are, or hope they are, or they would think they are. There's a lot of that. But the biggest problem I found with this book is that everything is written the same. That the characters don't sound different. The voices aren't different. Um, and that's actually a big problem, I feel. Because this book, it takes on an epic scope, but it takes on an epic scope um, in a way that leaves me feeling like we're not seeing the epic scope. We're seeing some small stories, which I get that they're supposed to be the microcosm representation of the macrocosm. Eleanor Rigby is a specific example of All the Lonely People, and Father Mackenzie are supposed to be specific examples of All the Lonely People, and here Fanny and Eleanor and all these other people whose names I can't remember because I'm terrible with names, they want they want more, and they come from these various impoverished or down on their luck in some way backgrounds, and they want to think big or do big or be big, and the world just winds up not quite working out quite the way they hoped for or planned for or wanted. And I get that that's kind of the macrocosm, in the individual, that he's working from the perspective that, look, this is what's happening to all of us, and they all sound the same because everybody is the same, and these things are having the same impact on everybody. But it's problematic when your characters don't have distinct voices, because at that point, you're listening to the same thing over and over again. And even if they're saying different things, even if they have different stories or messages or anything else, they sound the same. They sound identical. And it's very, very wearing. And it's also wearing because he doesn't there's no the writing doesn't come across as poetic or intense or anything else, and he doesn't have grand and sparkling descriptions. It's the descriptions are drudgery. The whole book just slogs along, and I personally found it just very tiring to read because I didn't feel like anyone was different from anyone else in any way, in any significant internal thinking, writing way. These people didn't have distinct voices, and while that may be part of the point, um, it's problematic for me as a reader because this is one of those books that I feel a little bit like it will get called a great book, but it won't be a good book. It won't be a book that you pick up and you say, I want to keep reading it. I keep turning the pages because I just can't put this down because I'm just enjoying the reading of this so much. Um, and so I don't have that. And also, frankly, I find the ongoing message about the working class to be not that the questions of the working class and the socialist revolution and the need to see various sides of an issue and all those sorts of things. It's not that I don't agree with certain aspects of the points that he's making in this book, but um I can agree with somebody and still think that they're not that interesting, still find them kind of tiresome, still find them unpleasant or dull or any number of other things. Um, and so I I think I can see why my mother liked this book because my mother liked epic things and she liked nitty-gritty details. My mother was the sort of person that academia was kind of made for. That is that old saw about knowing more and more about less and less. She loved to nail right down into the fine, nitty details of something and pull out every single bit of it and stack it all back together and then see what that told her about the world or whatever the topic was. And that's not really me. I mean, when I'm trying to get a job, I'll tell people that I'm detail oriented, but that's just a lie. Um, I'm sure we've all done that in a job interview. Of course I'm detail oriented. But the thing is that I can see why she would like this book. I can see why my mother would enjoy going through all of these line drawings that you see, these outlines of characters, these outlines of situations, and seeing how all of these bits and pieces came together, e pluribus unum, into one whole, into that American whole. By the way, I find it rather ironic that very early on in this book they wind up first in Canada, and then later in the book they wind up in Mexico, and then there's a bit set in Paris because, of course, it's World War One. Of course, you wind up in on the other side of the pond, or at least some people do. Um, and so I can see why people think this is a great book. I can see that John Dos Passos has a lot of ideas. I can see he's trying a lot of things. I can also tell you that it's tiresome and repetitious. And if you look at this cover, let's zoom in a little. This cover kind of feels a little bit too much like the book to me. You have this big, broad thing here, U.S.A., and around it you have these poorly drawn faces of these poorly drawn characters, and they're not really telling you anything. They're just kind of a big mass sitting in front of you. And this is not a book for me. This is not a book I get. This is not a book I appreciate, but I'll finish the trilogy because I'm going to keep trying to see. I'm going to keep trying because this was something my mother thought very, very highly of. So, I think that's all I have to say about this, and back to our regularly scheduled doldrums when I see you all next week.